So let us begin with the story. And I guess a couple of things to say, really. I mean, firstly, just to point out what it says. So the text there in terms of why Scotland Can Be exists, what it is that we're here to do. So as it says, we exist to build a nationwide culture of business as a force for good in Scotland, as a catalyst for place-based systems change around the world. And it's the first nationwide program of its kind. And so, yeah, we've got the word Scotland in our name, but we really do have this sort of global outlook in recognition that we are sharing a planet. And that's one thing we have in common with all human beings, and actually not just human beings, but all the other things, entities that we share this planet with. And so the other point about this slide is that this is actually a group of us, and some of you might recognize yourselves in this little huddle. This is the kind of work that sometimes we get up to, which is to actually be together and be in the outdoors and reflect on where we are, who we are, what we're doing, and just the beauty really of that big blue sky and the sea just is intentionally chosen. It's not just aesthetically a nice slide, it's communicating something about we really want to take a global perspective and take the opportunity in our work to reflect, because business as a force for good isn't necessarily an easy concept, or being a catalyst for place-based systems change around the world is not necessarily straightforward. So hopefully this gives you a flavour right up front of what we're about. And in terms of where we've come from, and those of you who've spotted the letter in our name, there is a relationship here with the B Corp community. And in fact, this gentleman is Bart Houlihan, who was one of the co-founders of the B Lab, and it's B Lab that sits behind the B Corporation movement globally. And I would be really interested, if I were able to see you, because I'm actually looking at the slides myself, I'd be really interested in a show of hands in terms of how many of you are actually familiar with B Corp. When I talk about B Corp and you see that big B in the background, how familiar is that to you? And in 2016, as it says, Bart came across to Scotland and he actually presented at the Can Do Forum. So Scotland Can Do is our sister initiative. It's a pre-existing initiative to us. And he brought this provocation, really. He brought this challenge to say, what might it look like? You know, what would be involved? How might an entire nation learn to be, think, and behave like a B Corp? So a really important point here is that Scotland Can Be has very much been inspired by the work of the B Corp community, but right from the very start, our remit and our outlook was actually a little bit broader than the B Corp community itself, because there is so much to learn. There is so much to explore in terms of what that is even trying to achieve, let alone how we might try and do that. As I said at the start, folks, please jump in, please unmute yourselves. If you do have any questions, or if anybody wants to flag a sort of, what's a B Corp, please let me know. But otherwise, what I'll do is, until I hear from you otherwise, I will continue. So it was a couple of years later that our program, which is government sponsored, was officially launched, and this is it. This is Nicola Sturgeon launching our program, albeit we didn't quite have our name nailed down at the time, so the name came a little bit later. But what was launched was this idea of can we do something intentionally with the aim of catalysing a fundamental shift in Scotland's approach to business. And it was a very wide remit, and certainly the early stages of our program was very exploratory, a lot of testing, a lot of researching, a lot of sort of thinking together about, well, what does that mean and how might we do that? But over the years, we have sort of refined our focus and developed our tools and learnt along the way to build what we have at the moment. So what do we have at the moment? What are we actually doing? You might well be asking. So the first thing to say is that we want, in catalysing this outlook on business, we recognise that there is an awful lot of stuff that already exists. And I don't know, again, whether that's consistent with your experience, but we are aware that there is a lot of good work in the world, not just the B Corp community, far from it. What I've got here is a smattering of some of the tools and frameworks that came before us. Some of you may be familiar with them, some of you may not be. So we have the Sustainable Development Goals. The rose-shaped, sort of flower-shaped image is actually Scotland's National Performance Framework, which is an amazing tool, which again, we're encountering that lots of people are not familiar with. We've also got a reference there to donor economics. And also just recognizing that Scotland itself is part of a small collection of nations that have identified themselves as being part of what's called wanting to be a well-being economy government, which is what the We Go thing there is about. And also a nod to the fact that, in fact, the Scottish government has proposed a legally binding target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. So all of these things overlap, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but what we do want to do is help everybody to navigate what all of these tools mean, how they work, and what we should do with them, and what they can actually bring to us with our businesses. And this slide is an example. It's a little bit crude and it's a bit simplistic at this stage because we've not given a huge amount of background, but it's just an example of how, if we rework some of these tools, they actually end up being quite aligned. So what we've done here with these sort of concentric circles is to say, if we use the pillars of the assessment tool that sits behind the B Corp community, which is called the B Impact Assessment. So if we break that down into its 5 pillars, the 5 impact areas as they're called, we've seen that actually that tool is a really helpful way to guide our thinking as business leaders through the various questions we might want to think about, which quite naturally lead on to that second layer you see, which is some of the outcomes within Scotland's national performance framework, which are not a million miles away from some of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So this is just one idea of how, when we take a step back, we see that these things do speak to each other. They do actually align themselves, or can align themselves. And what we're ending up doing there is then helping business leaders and advisors to really navigate this journey, which otherwise can be quite complicated. So a little bit of text down the right-hand side there. One thing I haven't mentioned is the SDG Action Manager, which is a sort of a bolt-on tool, which is free to use and in the public realm as part of, or that speaks to, the B Impact Assessment. There's an awful lot of stuff out there. And again, that's part of the reason why we felt it necessary to bring it together, to provide people with this roadmap. And it's not all about changing the world for the better. There is, and we've sort of borrowed this quote, as you can see, from elsewhere, to show that actually there is another argument alongside it, which is to say that this isn't necessarily about just becoming more charitable or more generous. This can actually have an effect on the way that companies operate. So to harness the power of purpose to drive performance and profitability, and these companies enjoying a distinct competitive advantage. It's not our idea. This is an idea that's out there, which for some people is a really compelling reason to get involved in this work. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of the kind of stuff that we do. Really, really happy to take questions, perhaps when I wrap up the slides, and I'll bring Jane into the conversation as well, and anyone else that wants to get involved, please do. But where I wanted to just sort of get us to was perhaps taking a step back and realizing holistically, this is a big job. There's a lot of work involved, which again is why we're so grateful to be talking to you today. But recognizing we have 2 strands of work. And as it says on this slide, the role here is not just about blinding everybody with impact measurement tools and jargon and frameworks that are dotting up around the world. We recognize that actually that's not going to be enough. The change we urgently seek will not come from impact measurement tools and bold visions for change alone. And as it also says on the slide here, it requires a culture shift. So we spend quite a lot of our time exploring and practicing and trying to sort of further the idea of actually how are we going to work together differently, and what are the micro behaviors and mindsets that we need to adopt in order to create the change that we seek. And that kind of work can happen regardless of whether you're adopting the BIA or looking to measure yourselves against the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. This is something that's a universal human story. And at the same time, the second strand of our work is around what we call impact trainings. And as a way of sort of shepherding everybody through what can sometimes feel like a really cluttered landscape, what we've done is we've built something called the Impact Journey, which is what you see on the right there. And this is a cyclical approach broken down into modules, a sort of a step-by-step guide to help people really think things through. And just by glancing at it very quickly, you might be surprised to see that it's actually step 5 that's measuring impact. That out of 6 modules that we've identified, that it's not until you get sort of more than 2/3 of the way round before measuring impact makes sense. And that's actually based on our experience and our observation of how, unless you understand why that would be important or valuable or helpful, unless you know how to start, often measuring impact can just be very, very inaccessible and really, really difficult. So it's been a pleasant surprise for us to get to the point where we're realizing, God, there's an awful lot of groundwork that needs to be done before we launch ourselves into gathering the data. And that's before we then report back on it, hold ourselves to account, and think about how we might want to improve things. And bringing that all together, so I've introduced these two strands. This is actually our flagship program, what we call our flagship program, which is called the Impact Economy Advisors Training. And it's this program that Jane has participated in, and it's so lovely to see other names pop up before we started. I know Jane's not the only one on this call to have participated in the training. So you'll recognize there on the right-hand side, there are the 6 modules again, but the training actually has got an extra layer to it, which is what you see in the green, which is around, okay, and as a business advisor, how might I want to use this work? What are the skills that I need to learn about in order to make this meaningful for my clients or the businesses that I'm involved in? And what do I then need to do as an advisor to make sure that I'm connected, that I'm supported, that I feel part of a community? And that impact culture phrase is absolutely intentional, because in fact, we want to take a very cohort-based approach to this training, in recognizing that what would be wonderful is to build a community of practice over time, which is very much up and running. Now, a lot of text. This is a big, I probably should have given a bit of a health warning, but really this is my last slide that I wanted to share, but it has got a lot of text, and I'll perhaps just let it sort of sit there for you to read in your own time. You don't need me to read it out necessarily, but it was actually a pleasure to stumble across this slide, because I've not seen it for some time. But what it does is it articulates, it kind of wraps everything together in terms of what is Scotland Can Be really about? What is it? What is our long-term vision? And I might just pick out a couple of sentences that you see here. The first one I want to start with is that our vision is that the Scotland Can Be programme is rendered obsolete as a nationwide culture of business impact is embedded in the values of the nation. And we really mean that. We do not intend to build another institution, another agency, another intermediary. Scotland is full of them. So this is very much around an intervention to hopefully create a bit of a shift in the way that the existing ecosystem works. Maybe one other that I'll pick out is the idea, the second one down, this vision that we have a fully trained, coordinated, coherent, cutting edge, nationwide system of business support professionals. Wouldn't that be amazing? To enable the integration of this national vision of the role of business. So I will let that percolate for a little while, and maybe I will at that point stop the share and maybe just check in with you all and see how you're doing. Make sure that you're all still there, because that's always a worry that everybody's gone. And if there are any questions, we can get into that.
Tim,
Was that Jane?
it is Jane, yes, hello.
Hi Jane, sorry, you just cut out when I heard your voice and then you cut out slightly.
Oh, sorry. Do you know, I don't have great tech today. I was trying to jump in actually at a slide, and if you don't mind, I'll do that now. See,
yes.
I've got my chance. Can I get you to share again that slide of the impact journey?
Yes.
There was a point there that I think's probably worth making. Just either's fine. And one of the things I think I was quite keen to share with everyone today is I came to this training, much like Tim's found the zebras. I came to this training very much in 5 and 6. I came quite specifically to find out about how what we did fitted in with Scotland's wellbeing economy ambitions. I was looking for another tool that let me do that. But what I found was the whole journey. What I found, and it'd be interesting to hear what Michaela thought of that as well, was a movement. I found my tribe. I found a bunch of really engaged individuals who were all grappling with these big questions around can traditional business be a force for good? Can we be part of a systems change to a well-being economy? And just, they probably didn't use those words, but they were all sort of nibbling around those same questions. And what the programme gave us was that common language to talk to each other. It gave us each other as well as a support group, and it gave us this brilliant tool that we can now use to explain probably our less coherent thoughts, I think, on that, as we take our clients back a few steps and make our way through this journey. So yes, no, I'll pass back to Tim and I'll stop talking, but it's just when that slide came up, that's what I really wanted to get across.
Thanks, Jane. And if there are any other slides, please just, it's not a problem to jump back in. I will stop the slideshare just now, just so that I can see if there are any other questions coming in. Sarah, did I see you pop your hand up just before we flashed back into the slides?
Yeah, I actually put the question in the chat, but then I thought maybe it'd be nicer to actually just ask it. So,
yeah.
So you know that I think having more advisors and the whole like ecosystem around businesses being more attuned to this agenda is really essential, because otherwise what happens is, and I'm sure there's other people here, and it's a conversation we have a lot amongst the zebras and amongst the B Corps, that you know, you get these business advisors who slightly patronizing about the fact that you want to do good in the world and think it's sort of a sideline to the fact that you should really be focusing on profit. So I just wondered if you get your business advisor from the Business Gateway, that's normally where people start, isn't it? Or you get one from Scottish Enterprise, which also happens. How do you then say, oh, I don't want this one, I want one that understands business for good? And how do we even get people to the point where they know that's a thing, I suppose? So how do we help, like, of all the businesses that are set up, how are we going to find the ones that need this support? I mean, I think we should get everyone to be doing it, actually, but in the interim, in the movement from business as usual to business for good, how do we just give people the breadcrumbs so they can find their way to the zebra community or the B Corps or Scotland Can Be? They can find a nice advisor like Jane, who's been through a training program, rather than one who goes, there, dear, show me your profit margins.
Sarah, what a wonderful, like dreamlike question to be on the receiving end of, because, you know, what you're speaking about there is the ultimate vision. And I don't think I was the only one to be nodding. I'm sure, Daisy, I saw you nodding when Sarah was saying, basically, I think everybody should be on the same page when it comes to this stuff. And ultimately, as lofty as that is, that's got to be the goal. And one of the things we talk a lot about is kind of coherence and alignment, so that it doesn't just end up being a lottery about who you get, or, you know, what part of the country you happen to live in. So it is a lofty goal, but that is the goal. What I also hear you saying, though, we're not going to get there overnight. So what do we do in the meantime? And actually, rather than trying to answer that, sort of making it up or giving a half-baked answer, I just think it's a wonderful question for us to go away and maybe think through with you all collectively, in terms of like, well, how do we do this? You know, I don't know how Scottish Enterprise works, really. I don't really know how the Business Gateway works. But it's a wonderful challenge, because it's sort of, it's a pathway to getting us to where we want to get to. That's my response. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything on that. I'm conscious, Elle, you might have some thoughts about that. But I would love to take that away as a bit of a gift, Sarah, if that's okay, that question. Any others? I'm classic. I need to keep an eye on the chat, don't I? Because people might have put something through in the chat. Is there anything else anybody wants to ask or say before we send you off to have some time together? And we have got some questions to prompt some discussions in your breakout groups. But before we do that, is there anything else anyone wants to know or contribute?
Can I just jump in on what Sarah said there? But it's a total love-in moment. It's probably not adding anything other than, you know, another layer of wonderful feelings. We've come across a quote recently that we've started to try and build into what we do. We are absolutely moving away from, here is your sustainability strategy, plug it in, stick it on the wall, doesn't that look great? And starting to talk more about, okay, what does a sustainable strategy look like for you within a well-being economy? How can we help you get ready? And I think that's a question that everyone should be looking at. You know, transition risk is a problem for every single business, not just businesses that have a purpose in the first place. And I don't know the answer to that either. Helpful. I'd like to throw that into the mix.
Love it, Jane. I'm going to be greedy and pop it out again just to sort of see what other thoughts or requests or ideas or questions anyone has. But otherwise, I'm going to take it as kind of general happiness, general willingness to proceed. Daisy, would it be a good time for me to just bring those questions